I am sitting here at Deloitte University, and I am really fired up to be sitting down with Sandy Pundmann, our managing partner for internal audit and a really good friend of mine. And I think what you're going to find is Sandy has got such a great perspective on the future of internal audit. And we're sitting here at CAE Edge, where we've got, I think, about 70 chief audit executives having that conversation with Sandy. And just like I did it with our CISO track, I'm going to pass the microphone after this to Sandy to launch our Chief Audit Executive Leadership series of podcasts under Resilient. And I think even if you're not a Chief Audit Executive, or if you're not in internal audit, I think you'll get a lot out of these conversations. Today, I'm going to talk to her about how the role of the Chief Audit Executive is changing, positioning the impact of internal audit with senior executives and the board. And this, in my mind, is so very important. The evolution of talent, where they're finding talent in internal audit nowadays, and partnering with the business.
So, for example, cyber is everywhere.
Yep.
So do we have the right cybersecurity and capabilities in place to manage our risk there? And I think thinking about that and helping prevent it before you have the incident or before there's smoke is really important. But how do you talk about that proactive element? It's challenging, but it is something that is really important.
Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we hear from resilient leaders who share real insights through their unfiltered stories. We look to learn about the leader, their learnings, what they would do different. Basically, we mine their mind so that we could share it with you so that you could do your job better. My hope is that you'll find a nugget or two during our conversation, and at the very least, you're going to get to hear from an incredible leader, Sandy Pundmann. So with that, let's get to my conversation with Sandy Pundmann, the leader of internal audit at Deloitte. I have a question that is totally unrelated to internal audit, but I have to start there.
Okay.
Are you ready?
All right.
So I know in your early years, you got a scholarship to college, but the backstory is super interesting. So can you share it?
Absolutely. Let me put some context around this story by saying this took place way back in 1977 when I was a senior in high school. So please keep in mind, it was a very different time and mindset back then. I was in advanced biology, and as part of our class, we all had to do a significant science fair project that had an opportunity to lead to scholarships and other opportunities. So I developed a study to evaluate the effects of hormones. I had about 100 chickens in the study. And this was all done in a very safe, controlled, and ethical manner. It was really fascinating research. That teacher really encouraged me to get outside my comfort zone and take on a challenging project that would really make an impact. That science fair project really helped set things in motion for me. Not only did I get a great scholarship, but I learned how to think about things differently. I saw firsthand how impactful a coach or leader, and in this case, my biology teacher, could be on a person. And I started expanding my perspectives on what I wanted to do with my life.
That's how you got your start. That's how
I got
we
my
got you
start
to college. That's where you got your scholarship.
Thinking and doing creative stuff. And I had a really good mentor that encouraged me to go into science.
Yep.
And math and do all what's now STEM.
Yeah. Well, knowing you, the one other thing is I would say you totally just said yes to an opportunity. It's like, hey, this could be your opportunity into college. This could be a scholarship. And that's kind of the way you operate. You
right.
Just say
it
yes
is.
Oftentimes. So
it is. I like ambiguity and I like chaos. So it's a lot of fun.
So tell us a bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? So what was the backstory before you got the scholarship?
So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and my father died, unfortunately, when I was 13. My mom was 36. My dad was 42 of a heart attack. Very different times. And I think that's really formed how I approach work and business because all of a sudden, my mom, who had never worked after she got married to my dad, had to do 3 jobs. She waitressed, she did telemarketing. She set up insurance appointments for an insurance agent, and she babysat. And all of a sudden, it's like I am never going to be put in that position.
Right.
And so that has driven me and my brother, who's very different than me, but has really set the stage for how we approach life. Is always, I like that security. I like doing something new. And it really drove me to pursue something where I could take care of myself.
It probably also taught you maybe a certain level of work ethic, I would imagine, because you see your mom just grinding every day to take care of you guys.
Yes, it did. And my brother's just like me. He's my younger brother, but he is very much a risk taker, but really drives and runs, and it's just really changed the whole environment.
What's interesting, though, you say you're a risk taker on one side.
Oh, I'm
right?
not as much of a.
You're not a risk taker.
Not
but
as much.
But you kind of are. But you also like security. I would say maybe in the context of like professional services, you may be a risk taker.
Well, I came to Deloitte. I worked in industry for 16 years before I came to Deloitte.
Right.
And one of the things that appealed to me about working in professional services was the guy who recruited me said it's like starting a business with somebody else's money. So I didn't have to invest all my money, but I was starting a business and being creative and really trying to make something out of nothing. So that was fun. So
go to that, because I actually wanted to touch on that. You get out of college, then where do you go? It sounds like you have this almost career before Deloitte.
Yes. So I got out of college, and I was a computer science and accounting major. Now, my kids cannot believe I actually have an IT background, because I do have to ask them, do I swipe up, or how do I do this on the phones? But this was a long time ago. So I had lots of job opportunities. I actually started in IT and then I was at a telecom company, and I actually did a rotation into internal audit and then back into finance and in and out until I ended up as the chief audit executive at the company.
So what then brought you to Deloitte? Like what propelled that change from industry to Deloitte beyond what you shared? I mean, that's a huge change.
So I was back in the day, they were looking for a lot of women executives, and I was actually in a program called Leadership America. It was for 100 women across the country who were. It was set up so that you would get out and involved in your community and make a difference and make an impact in your community, in your company, and with your not only your profession. But I met a partner at Deloitte, and she started talking to me, and 2 years later, I ended up getting recruited to Deloitte, and I finally made the leap.
The leap. Was that a federal program? Was that like something that the
No,
government
it was something
drove,
that they
or?
were starting to get you involved in politics and get in community. They looked at women and said women get so heads down the more senior they get.
Right.
And this, again, was back in the 90s.
Yep.
Women get so heads down, they don't think about what they're going to do in the community and how they're making a difference. And it was a great program. We were, like women running for office, women getting involved in their community. You get so busy taking care of kids and doing all this that it's crazy. But I met a partner at Deloitte. I thought the guy was trying to sell me something, and ended up he was trying to recruit me. He was trying to sell me something.
Deloitte.
Yeah, he was trying to sell me Deloitte.
So now you've been in internal audit for what, 20 years, it sounds like?
I probably more close to 25. In and out. At Deloitte, I've had a lot of different jobs, but I've been around the profession for about 25 years.
But you've either been engaged in it or watching it from afar. What's changed, do you think?
Oh, it's very, very different. Way back when I first went into internal audit, it was really much more focused on operational risks. So you really didn't look at financials. That was the external auditors. You really looked at things like we did find money audits. We found operational improvements. You really focused on that, and you had a very structured program and strategy, and it was very different than what all the things that have happened today.
So what excites you about the future? I mean, obviously, you're kind of on the forefront around internal audit of the future. What gets you going? Like, what excites you?
So I think internal audit is changing tremendously. There's so many new opportunities with advancements in technology and robotics process automation and using things like risk sensing. What we're seeing is all the assurance that you have to provide from a perspective of how you assure that the right processes and controls are in place within a company are now, you can use technology to look at the entire population. So you use analytics, you use dynamic risk assessment to figure out where there are risks before there actually is the risk manifest. And so a lot of new insights and new capabilities and focus on how you do risk assessments, how you actually do projects using agile software development capabilities to actually change how you do your projects so you can do them in an agile manner, much more customer engagement, providing insights, not just data.
So if I'm an executive, I'm like, okay, I hear like continuous auditing, I hear analytics, RPA, agile, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Do you have like a good example or story that you could share that brings this to life around kind of what the future of IA is? And you could use any one of those as an example.
Right. So I think the future of IA is really designing so you can provide insights and why do I care to an executive.
Right.
You know, they don't really need all the data, and you need to provide why do I care and what do I need to do.
Right.
So, for example, one of my clients implemented a new financial system, and they were changing their procurement process.
Yep.
Sounds simple, right?
Yep.
So they were moving everything to a shared service center. So we did a project where we used analytics to look at the procured pay process. So we used analytics. We spent a couple of weeks looking at it, and what we identified is, yes, all the processes and controls were being complied with, so that you need before you pay an invoice, there has to be a purchase order and there has to be a purchase order requisition. But when we really looked at the analytics, we found that 85% of the purchase orders were being created after the invoice came in. So they were just doing things to satisfy the controls. And what it was is people didn't know how to use the new system. So they knew that there was a process that you had to have a purchase order. So they were creating them after the fact. So the process was really not working because of, them doing it after the fact. But analytics was able to really provide that insight before we proceeded. And we were able to look at the entire population.
Well, and it's almost kind of form over substance. They were doing the process. They just weren't doing it the way it was supposed to.
And nobody was really looking at it. It was form over substance.
Yeah. Interesting. So what about the CAE, the Chief Audit Executive? God, I should not use acronyms on this, but the Chief Audit Executive, how's their role changing?
So their role is really, we have a process where you look at the basic block and tackle, steward and operator, how you get your job done. Well, what we're seeing at the Chief Audit Executive level by the board and by the audit committee chair, and the C-suite is they really want the Chief Audit Executive to have a point of view and perspectives on what's going on with the business. So don't just give me data, but give me insights and really fulfill a catalyst and strategist role within the organization. So we're going off and we're getting into a new line of business, or we're launching in a new country. Do we have the right capabilities and processes in place to launch? Or are we just going out, free form without having perspectives in place?
I think you just brought up kind of our four faces of the CAE. Can you describe that? Because I think it's actually super important to frame that up, because I actually think if you're a CAE out there, right, just a way to even just think about how I do my job. And I think you mentioned like a strategist catalyst. I can't even talk today. And then a steward and operator. Maybe just at a high level describe what that is and how a CAE potentially could apply that to their role.
Right. So a steward and operator is really the basic block and tackle, how you hire people, how you allocate resources to pieces of the business. And, operator is communicating to the executive team and the audit committee the results of your work, et cetera. It's really the basic block and tackle of how you look at what I would call your financial processes, your operational processes, your basic conducting your internal audit plan and your projects and getting that all done. The catalyst and strategist is really bringing it up to a higher level. So how do you influence your organization to think about what's in front of them, or how do you be a catalyst for change? So you don't want people really to do things because internal audit said you had to do them. You really want them to think about like, okay, I'm going to scale this business. What are the capabilities I need in place before I, expand? And so the catalyst and strategist role for a chief audit executive is more in position of influence and having a seat at the table. So if you're in a strategy session, you're looking at the strategic plan, how does internal audit bring up what are the risks and how we're managing those risks to an acceptable level as we move forward, or helping people think about those risks and those opportunities as well?
What do you think gets in the way? Because I would imagine for many CAs out there, they're like, yeah, I got that steward and operator thing down. And I hear you, Sandy, that I should be elevating, but that thing, it's easy for you to say, but it's not that easy. What advice do you have for them to elevate up so that they truly are a catalyst or are integral to the strategic thinking of the organization?
Yeah, they really have to, I think, have the confidence to go forth and really take on that role. And I think really one of the things that gets in the way is there's a lot of perceptions and brand about what internal audit does. So internal audit has this, green eye shades, kind of the police and the cop, and they're going to come check all the policies and procedures. And if you were supposed to sign it in pink ink by midnight and you signed it in red ink at 12:01, oh, you didn't do it right. And so I think internal audit has to really overcome perceptions of what the role is. And so it's really, really important for a chief audit executive to think about the brand and the reputation and what the stakeholder expectations are within their organization and even at their board level, because they may have different expectations. And so you really have to say what it is you're doing, what it is you're not, what your vision, your mission is, and then you have to execute on it. And it's the same way for any business, but it's really, really important for internal audit to really understand what's needed in the organization, establish a vision, a mission, a purpose, and then execute on that strategy and also communicate what it is not. And you have to do that with everybody. You have to say it 10 times over and over again.
The one thing that, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, one thing that I've done with internal audit, I guess to a certain degree, but even broader risk organizations is a good place to start is with the company strategy. Because oftentimes what happens is our internal audit or risk management groups talk about what they're doing, but they don't necessarily answer the underlying why to what the executive cares about.
Right.
Is that something you've seen or you would advocate?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you don't have a seat at the table when you're looking at the strategy or the plan or even the financial plan and analysis, it's a great place to start and look at it and say, what are the risks there? And then how are we managing them? Or how do we even understand what risks are being undertaken and how it's being executed? And so great place for internal audit to think about what they're doing. Do we have any activities in those areas? And then how are we managing them?
And the good thing is it's such an easy place to start.
Right.
Because literally you could just go to whatever executive briefing books they look at their meetings, literally take that and then start to integrate risk into it.
Right. And it's not one size fits all because if you think about a startup company, startups tend, if Mike, you and I were starting a business, we could actually keep all the customers, all the information. We probably can keep it in a notebook.
Right.
And we can keep it on a piece of paper. But when all of a sudden we have, instead of having 5 customers, we have 10,000 customers, we might need different processes and capabilities. And that's where internal audit really has to think about, what do I need at what point in time to help us manage our risks and accomplish the business objectives that we have? So you can't just say one size fits all.
Yeah.
And that's really something that the chief audit executives and their teams need to think about as they're communicating.
Do you have any good examples building off on all of this of where your clients have done a great job of demonstrating the impact of internal audit, any of the activities to senior management or the board?
I think it's always, it's hard to say, oh, we prevented this from happening, or we identified this before there was an issue. I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot is internal audit getting involved in pre-implementation of systems or, new product launches. So getting in to say, what are the expected capabilities and processes that we need before the new system gets put in or the new product gets launched. So, for example, cyber is everywhere. Yep. So do we have the right cybersecurity and capabilities in place to manage our risk there? And I think thinking about that and helping prevent it before you have the incident or before there's smoke is really important. But how do you talk about that proactive element? It's challenging, but it is something that is really important.
I have a client right now that's going through that exact thing, and one of the challenges that they have, and once again, this isn't relegated just internal audit, it's broader risk management, although internal audit's included. But what they've been saying is, our people just have to get out and start engaging with the business. It's almost like relationship management 101, because if you're like, oh, you got to include me, but it's kind of like after the fact, or you're asking to be included, very difficult, versus if you're literally walking the halls and you're talking about these new strategies or priorities that the organization has, then you can just quickly say, hey, here's a way that internal audit can actually bring some value to that process. Can I show you what we could do?
Right. Right.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things, new capabilities like using, taking agile software development principles can really, and applying it to internal audit can really help with that process. One of the benefits of agile is getting stakeholder engagement. So we invite you into the table to look at the risks. And we don't just come with internal audit's point of view of what the key risks and what the things that should be done. We get the business unit leaders' perspectives of what are the risks and what should we prioritize as important before you do the project. It really, really helps to get consensus and to get that perspective and the business point of view so that you're looking at the things that matter most to the people that are impacted the most.
It feels like agile is like the biggest no-brainer ever.
It is.
I've seen it, the impact of it at my client. Beyond what you just shared, if somebody were like, okay, Sandy, I hear what you're saying about agile, but really what is it? Like, is there like a 90,000 foot overview of what applying agile to internal audit really means?
Well, one of the things I think, I like the concept of doing things in 2-week sprints. So instead of doing field work, planning, and reporting for a project, for an audit.
Which could be how long?
It could be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, whatever.
Yep.
Now you're doing everything in like 2-week sprints.
Okay.
So you do field work, then you do some planning, you do some analysis, and then you do the work, and you have a point of view at the end of the day. So we're only going to focus on these 2 things, but at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to have a point of view on that. Then we do the next 2 weeks. And all the while, you're iterating as you go. Every single day, you're talking about what do we get done? What are we going to do today? What do we consider action items? And you move everything through a process that is much more, it's much more team. It's more self-directed by a team. And you get things done faster. And you call it quits if you need to earlier on.
What do you mean? Like you'd stop an audit?
You would stop an audit. So if you get in there and I'm working with you as a stakeholder and we're looking at an issue, and like the example I told you with the with procurement, we realize that nobody's they're doing purchase orders after the invoices come in. We're done. We found the issue. There's no need to do all the other stuff we were planning on doing.
I mean, stupid question. Would you say like if we were to roll the clock back 7 years, we would have just kept going?
Oh, we would have kept going. Yeah.
So you just
because you have your crystal ball,
yeah,
and these are the 10 things I'm going to have a perspective on, and my audit has to look at these, and then we do them until we're done, and then we reveal the big report at the end of the day, and we don't have all the engagement from the customers, all that. Where if we engage the customers up front, we can usually in the first 2 weeks we can say, oh, this is so messed up. We're just going to stop and we're going to fix it.
So
we've really
that's
seen
important
a lot of
because
engagement.
if a normal audit goes 8 weeks, let's just say I'm making that number up, and you're saying in the first 2 weeks we found this, you could theoretically save 75% of time,
right?
Theoretically, under that example, to redeploy to something that potentially is higher value,
right?
Also, I would say probably conversely, if you found some stuff and you're like, oh, we got to go deeper, you probably allow for that as well.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. So you want to
like
do a
an
deep
agile
dive.
expert now.
Yes,
right? I can
absolutely.
do this now.
But it's applicable not just to internal audit, but it's applicable to all other parts of finance and other parts of the business.
Right.
To take that iterative, kind of iterative approach and more team focus, where you actually have a coach helping you think. You have stand-up meetings every day. You really cut through a lot of bureaucracy as well. Thing with internal audit is how much is the minimum viable documentation that I need to support my conclusion or have a point of view on something? And historically, internal auditors hide behind documentation.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Right.
But, they spend all this time documenting till the end of the earth, all the things they looked at. And I talked to Mike and they document everything. You cut all that out. What is the minimum you need? And if you're engaging the stakeholders throughout the process, you don't need to document as much because they're already bought in.
I think that the point you just made is probably one of the most important is you're not waiting to share the insights with the stakeholders.
Oh, no.
You're engaging them, like you said, at the very beginning, and then you're engaging them throughout.
Right, exactly.
I love that.
All throughout.
I love it. So I guess I think the takeaway is like if you are a senior executive or an audit committee chair, you should be asking your CAE, how are you applying Agile?
Right, exactly. So I think it's going to change how we do internal audit. I think it's going to change how we do all aspects of finance going forward.
So I'm guessing, this is a guess on my part, but the talent model and who is being hired into internal audit groups is possibly evolving. Is that true?
Oh, I think it's totally true. It used to be you'd hire accounting types and people who are very focused on, CPAs, hire CIAs and things like that. But now we need a lot more data scientists. We need things called purple people, people who actually have technology skills and they have analytical skills. And in my opinion, one of the biggest skills you need is people who are business acumen and they have understanding of the business. They can relate, they can understand risk and objectives and more of a consulting mindset versus really just, here's a policy and procedure and checking to see if you followed the policy.
So it's
Very
a much more
different approach.
diversified group of people that
Yes.
you're bringing into internal audit. How are
Yes.
you selling kids that are coming out of college on internal audit now?
Well, I think the kids coming out of college now really want to make an impact that matters to the organization. I think one of the opportunities with internal audit is you can really get out and look at a process. Let's say you're looking at a revenue process or you're looking at a new product launch.
Yep.
You really have the opportunity to figure out what really matters. How do I look at it and how can I provide advice on what's working well, what needs to be improved, et cetera. And so it's an opportunity to learn the business and really make an impact that matters.
How about how is internal audit partnering with other functions or not? Like, I'm guessing that's potentially another best practice, but maybe if you could talk about where we stand on that scale and what you're seeing in terms of best practices.
So on partnering with other functions, I think one of the things on the non-financial services side, there's much more regimented requirements of having, a third line, which is internal audit, second line, which might be your chief compliance officer, your policies and procedures, and your first line, which is your business.
Yep.
In financial services, there's much more rigor on how there has to be
clear
those, lines in the sand.
Yep.
On non-financial services companies, we're seeing the blurring happening, immediately. For example, many of my clients are also, they're the chief audit executive, but they're also responsible for facilitating enterprise risk management at their organization. They may wear the chief compliance officer hat. And I think it's the imperative and the question being asked by boards and the C-suite are, why do we do risk assessments for all these different groups separately? Why can't we just do one risk assessment and have different products and capabilities and outcomes that satisfy each of the different groups? I had an executive call me and said, do you know we spend $500 million on compliance activities? We've got to cut that down to about $200 million. Very, very large organization.
Right.
But no longer are you looking for perfection in risk management, but you have to figure out what's your tolerance, how do you manage it, and internal audit has to be on the same on the same playing field and understand what is the risk tolerance. They can't be looking at it in a different way than all the other groups are.
But I think what you're saying is important on many levels, because I've had a lot of clients complain, not necessarily to me, but the way they've structured their different risk groups is that they all do their own risk assessment. And the challenge is they will say, oh, well, the nuances between a compliance risk assessment and internal audit risk assessment and IT risk assessment, ERM, goes on.
Fraud.
It's like, it's different. And so that's why we have to do it different. And the problem is the stakeholders, the business is like, well, it kind of all feels the same to me.
Right.
And I think what you're saying is we could be sophisticated enough to do one risk assessment, but address all these different needs.
Right. Right. Well, for example, one of the things that's impacting a lot of companies today is culture. So, used to be internal audit would never touch and do a culture audit.
Yep.
Now they're being asked to do a culture audit. They're actually in financial services. They ask you to look at risk models and really challenge the models, which is really almost challenging the strategy.
Right.
So the times are changing, and so all these new risks and elements are coming into play, and you have to look at it across the company. You have to collaborate. You have to talk to the various leaders. You can't be out in left field and stand behind. I've got to be independent and objective and stand behind the professional standards for internal audit.
So let's go back to that chief audit executive again for a moment. What are some of the skills and capabilities you think are important for them, especially going back to that framework we talked about, strategists, catalysts, they need to do more of that. When you talk to organizations that may be looking for a new CAE and you say, here are the things you should really be looking for, what would be a couple of those?
Well, some of them, you have to be very principled, ethical. You have to provide leadership and direction. You have to be trusted, truthful. And you have to be you have to be influential. So you have to be able to influence various executives to understand, to communicate why do they care. I mean, nobody is going to do something because the chief audit executive said you need to do it. You need to communicate why do they care, what matters, why this is in their best interest, or is this, if it's a regulatory thing, why they have to do it from a regulatory thing. But it's very, very important that you stand up for your principles and that you have that transparency, and you'll be able to do the right thing always.
You said two things that I think are really interesting. I'm just going to kind of go back to. One is there's almost this foundational, like even though the role of internal audit's changing, even though the role of the CAE is changing, you still have to have that foundation,
right,
like where your reputation is beyond reproach.
Right.
Right. The second thing, though, you said is, and I think this is equally important, is that you need to be influential, because the challenge is if you just hire a CAE and they don't have that brand, if they don't have that confidence, the challenge is they may not be as successful as they otherwise would want to be. And so while that's kind of a soft thing, it's probably one of the things that, as audit committees and others are looking for CAs, they've got to take that into consideration.
Oh, exactly. If somebody you have to be able to stand up. It's really being a leader,
right,
and not just being a manager.
You
can manage your internal audit function and get all the reports done that you said you're going to get done with the audit committee, but you can have really no impact. And to be a leader, it's really doing the right thing and really standing up and providing perspective and insights and influencing where you need to at various leadership, from the C-suite to your board to the audit committee. And you have to be able to be principled to do that.
What's funny about that, I mean, it's actually fairly simple. It's like you would never likely hire a CFO and say, oh, this CFO is not going to be influential.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's like
right.
It would never happen. So what you're saying is they're almost like one in the inner circle, that they've got to have the confidence and the capability to influence people like the other senior executives
right,
on the
exactly.
team.
They have to be a senior executive.
Yep. Okay. Seems like it would be kind of hard to be a CAE at this point in time.
Harder
so the pressure
days.
has got to be enormous. What do you tell CAEs? Like, how do you counsel them to thrive in this environment where it's changing, the expectations for them to elevate is more like, what would you tell them?
I think it's a great opportunity. We're seeing a lot of executives moving into the chief audit executive role as a way for them to understand the business,
yep,
and to really get to know all the executive leaders, to have an opportunity to have exposure to the board and really broaden their horizons. So it's a great opportunity for someone to step up. So a lot of the executives now are coming from other parts of the business. I think, thinking about it, not just providing that assurance in the organization, but being able to do provide the advice and the insights, and really help to anticipate where there's risks that are starting to arise in your organization, is a phenomenal opportunity. And I think you just have to have confidence. You don't have to have everything ticked and tied before you go and socialize something with an executive, and you have to be confident in throwing the yellow flag when you don't have all the data.
Right. So Sandy, let's pivot to you. I want to hear about some challenges that you faced in your career, and we did name this podcast Resilient. And what are some of the things that you personally did to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so one of my first obstacles in my career as a chief audit executive was when I first got the role in industry. And I was very, very young. So I was about 7 years younger than anybody else at my level. And at that time, I was the only female in the boardroom. So I had my very first audit committee. I went in, did my presentation, came out, and my boss said, "Oh, wow, you did a great job. However, you totally undermined your credibility because you smiled too much." And it was great advice. It's some of the best advice I've ever had, because I was probably 31.
Yep.
And I was talking about very serious things, and all these board members and audit committee members were probably in their 60s and 70s. And my boss said, they're all looking at you saying, "Oh my gosh, she's so young. She could be my daughter. She could be my granddaughter." And so, as a female, understanding body language and how you portray yourself, especially if maybe you're a young male or young female, and really making sure that your message and your body language and your tone of your voice is commensurate with the message that you're trying to portray. Very good advice. And really thinking about how others perceive you as you're saying something. So even with the role of internal audit, sometimes because you're the internal audit leader, they always have a defense mechanism put up because I'm not going to listen to anything they're going to say because it's coming from the auditor and they're just trying to make me comply with something, you know. And so really, how do you achieve that level of influence? And thinking about all aspects, I think, are a really important
It's
element.
funny because there's almost two concepts there, though, that are competing. One is you need to change their mindset of you and the role. So you need to be authentic.
Right.
And you can't be way too serious because that's kind of the stereotype.
Right.
And so you're kind of like walking this tight line of like who you need to be in that moment in time to influence them, because you got to be different, but you also got to be yourself.
Right.
That's not easy.
It isn't easy. And I think one of the things too is get out of your office, get out of your box. So the person, when I took over the role, I'm a very outgoing person. I went out and my boss said, my advice to you is be out, understand the business, meet with your clients, not when just you have a project to report on or you have something bad to say, but be out there and understand the business and live in the field. And I think that's some of the best advice I've had as a leader, regardless of what you're leading, whether it's internal audit or whatever, but really get out and be on the, have a rapport, build a relationship with executives, understand where they're coming from, understand their business, and you'll be much more effective.
Couldn't agree more. Can you, though, describe, and this sounds like one of the most basic things, what you're saying is like, don't just sit in your office the whole time writing reports and then ultimately engaging with your clients on it. Get out there. But what does that practically mean? When you say it, that's a cliche, walk the halls, are you literally saying like you proactively think about who are the key people that you need to engage with? Like, how do you do that?
Right. So one of the things in my role here at Deloitte, I do lead our executive transition labs. Okay. And one of the things that we do with our executives, their new executives coming into their role, is we look at stakeholders. Yep. And who are their key stakeholders, from the board to the audit committee to the C-suite, et cetera. And one of the things that we do for each and every one of them is we look at your cadence that you're going to meet with them. So it may seem intimidating to say, oh, I'm going to meet with my CEO once a quarter, but you need to get it on the books. They need to see you and have a rapport, a standing agenda meeting. And it doesn't mean when you have something bad to say. Right. And so really thinking about the relationship you have and how you have a level of understanding, and then taking actions to execute on moving that needle so that you have a rapport and you have an understanding, you know what's top of mind for them. It's really, really important.
And so what you're suggesting is, you talked about that in the context of a transition into a new role, but it sounds like what you're saying is that's a tool and approach that anybody could use. Right. Like, who are the critical stakeholders to me and my organization? And one of the things that I would add possibly is, it's not only about knowing who they are, but like, do they actually support us? Right. And what are the things that we could do maybe to change their mind? And it's almost like being proactive in executing those activities, so that you're engaging with them frequently and often.
Right. And don't just meet with them when you have something negative to say. When you're bringing bad news. Nobody wants to do that. They want to talk about what they're doing, what their risks are, what their opportunities are. Establish a rapport and establish a cadence. I'm going to try to meet with them every month, or I'm going to try to meet with them every quarter. And then it's not just when you have something to report card on them. Yes.
Well, what I like about that is, I do think that there's an organic nature of walking the halls, like being present and seen. But what you're adding is, yes, but it's actually a thoughtful process by identifying who the stakeholders are and doing things around them.
Right, and then listening. Listening is key for everything.
Is a good thing, yes. What about as an internal audit leader? So you're an internal audit leader at Deloitte. What does success now mean for you? You know, you've been in industry, you've been at Deloitte. Kind of, how do you look at success personally?
So for me personally, it's really being viewed as a leader and making a positive impact on the people that I work with and my clients I serve. And so it's very, very important to me that I make a difference. And I'm very passionate about that. I'm very passionate about serving my clients. I'm passionate about my people. And so thinking about what gives you energy and thinking about what impact you want to meet and what your legacy is very important.
So that's maybe a good, not even segue, and I wasn't even asked about this, but we're sitting at CAE Edge, which maybe is like the manifestation of your purpose, right?
Yes,
Because you got a lot of clients, you got a lot of Deloitte people. What are you doing here?
We are doing here, we brought about 70 chief audit executives together to really think about the future of internal audit, what their leadership role is, how they make an impact on their clients and their organization, and how they adapt to this changing business environment we're in. So it no longer are the expectations that you just provide assurance over the processes and controls, but they're looking for chief audit executives to advise and anticipate risk and have that seat at the table. And so we've got all the people here. They're talking about leadership. They're talking about innovation and technology and what the expectations are and how they're going to adapt. So they're crafting their future.
And you're going to be talking to some of them, right?
I am.
You're taking over for me to interview some of these folks.
That's right. We're here
cool.
to talk to them and get their perspective on the hot topics in internal audit, how their talent in their organization is changing, what they're doing to innovate, how they're dealing with some of the new issues and emerging issues in their organization, and where they see the future be going.
That's really cool. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. Okay, so let me just ask a couple final questions. And I love this one because as a leader and going back to your purpose around really helping people achieve kind of their aspirations and dreams, at Deloitte, and this would apply to many other organizations, but we have a group of extremely smart, motivated, and hungry people, right? How do you motivate them?
I think you have to get them engaged on something with a purpose. And I have 3 men. They were young boys earlier, but they range anywhere from 26 to 32.
These are your kids.
My kids.
Yep.
And they want to make a difference. They want to make an impact. They have to have a purpose. And I think really getting people motivated of why they're doing what they're doing, getting them engaged, showing how they fit into the piece of the puzzle is really important.
I'm going to ask this question, and I'm almost asking it just to maybe be a little provocative because I have a point of view. But can you help somebody find a purpose in internal audit?
Can you find a purpose? I think you have to understand why, and you have to. You're not just doing it because you're checking the box and doing a checklist, but really getting them to understand why the business or why it matters, and then it makes sense of why you're doing it. So if you can help improve upon efficiency, you can help find money and revenue, you can help the company achieve their objectives more effectively, that helps give purpose, and you can affect change in a positive manner. That's exciting.
Yep. That's a good answer. Okay, last question, and I noted this before, but we call this podcast Resilient. What are the attributes of a resilient leader in your opinion?
A resilient leader really adapts and changes and can think on their feet, is comfortable with chaos and ambiguity, and really will drive towards the right thing, especially in internal audit. Is
there anybody in your career or even personally that exemplifies like resilience?
I think we just heard from Cynthia Cooper, who was the whistleblower at WorldCom, and I think she exhibited resilience beyond belief in the face of people telling her, this is not an issue. She persevered, and she really did the right thing in spite of all the feedback and the obstacles in front of her. And I think that really shows resilience and perseverance to do the right thing.
You know what you're raising, I've never thought about this, is resilience is oftentimes a word to describe how you respond when you get knocked down. But you can almost argue that there was resilience even in making that decision of, I'm going to, blow the whistle on this issue.
Right.
And without, I don't know her, but without the values potentially that she had, she probably wouldn't have been able to be resilient in the first place.
That's exactly right. And she was, she got brought up, and she uses quotes from her mother to talk about how she, always wasn't intimidated by anyone, even when people tried to intimidate her.
I always ask, and maybe it's a good way to end it, like, what's the worst that could happen? At the end of the day, I mean, it almost feels like a lifetime ago that WorldCom happened. It is a lifetime. Like, time has a way of also, I guess, dealing with any challenges that you have to go through your life. So while I'm sure it was a very difficult time for her, now she gets to go to Deloitte and other organizations and share the experience.
Yes, and share her experiences and help people think about how they would act in those situations and how resilient they are.
Good. How was that?
Good.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. Well, that was a lot of fun. Sandy, thank you very much. Hopefully everybody got to see and hear, I guess I should say, Sandy's personality. She is obviously really excited about the future of internal audit, has a lot of great ideas. I also want to thank all of you who subscribe and listen to Resilient, a Deloitte podcast produced by our friends at Rivet Smart Audio. Find us at Deloitte.com or visiting your favorite podcatcher, iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, even Spotify, keyword Resilient. And if you're enjoying these conversations, share them with your colleagues, your friends, your family. I always say my sister actually listens to them, and she's an art teacher, and she gets stuff out of it. So if she could get something out of it, I'm sure your family and friends can as well. And I would be extremely grateful if you could spend 1 minute providing a rating. Ratings play a large role in how the podcast gets promoted in places like iTunes. And hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter mkearney33, with any comments or recommendations you have for future guests. My profile on LinkedIn is under Michael Kearney. Let me leave you with a quote from Winston Churchill that really sums up the essence of Sandy Pundmann. A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty.